Welcome to Practical Access. I'm Lisa Dieker.
And I'm Rebecca Hines. And Lisa, I'm excited about today's guest in part because of their commitment to STEM skill acquisition for all students, but also, just a career committed to preparing teachers with skills that can support all students. Who do we have?
Yeah, so we're really excited to have a really good friend of both of ours and a colleague, Sarah Bush, who is a professor and the Lockheed Martin Eminent Scholar at the University of Central Florida, and the author with Karen Karpy we had earlier on a book called The Math Pact. It's a series, and we'll be highlighting some of that. But welcome, Sarah. We're so excited to have you with us.
Thank you both so much for having me. And I'm just so excited to spend just a little bit of time with two of my favorite people.
Well, with that, I'm going to kick it off with the first question. And I think one of the things, Sarah, that you've always done so well, and I really appreciate it, is you're an advocate for just kids. It doesn't matter if it's special ed or general ed. Can you talk to us just a little bit about this high leverage practice movement and kind of the differentiation for kids with disabilities and kind of your world of how you see NCTM, HLPs, and special ed, and that world kind of merging in the work that you do?
Sure. Thanks so much, Lisa. When I think about the high leverage practices, and I know we've even had some past doctoral students focus on those that we've worked on together, I really don't see them. I see them fitting seamlessly with much of the work put out by the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. In particular, when I think about the high leverage practices, and then I think about NCTM's 8 mathematics teaching practices, which are also high leverage practices, I think the thing they have in common is that, they're both essential. Every practice in there is essential. And, I was even kind of reviewing the high leverage practices document, and they said something in there that I really loved, which was that they are so important that skillfully executing them is fundamental to effective teaching. And I feel that way about both sets. And to me, good teaching practice is good teaching practice. And so much of what's effective in the special ed literature, around UDL and other things, absolutely we should be leaning to in our general education content areas, those of us who focus on that as well. So I just see them as synergistic and, really fitting together very nicely.
Sarah, I love what you're saying here because across my career, what I see and when I'm preparing teachers, doing professional development, with teachers in schools, et cetera, is that I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that there's sometimes just 1 point difference between whether a student is labeled as a student with disabilities. And yet I think that's what resonates, to some people, especially I've found in the area of, math, to be honest, we have this idea of what's appropriate for certain types of kids. So in your professional work, what are some of the basic premises that you try to explain to teachers about this idea of supporting every learner, with their own individual abilities?
You brought up something I think is so important. And I think it goes back to the idea that, historically we have assigned labels to students. And many of and I'm not talking about a student formally labeled as having IEP, but just in general, we use these deficit labels often to describe groups of students. These are, and they are labels that carry such long-term negative effects that, we actually talk about this in NCTM's Catalyzing Change series, which I was the lead writer of the middle school volume. And we talk about no longer using deficit labels to describe students. And what you mentioned isn't exactly the same thing, but one thing that I think that's so important for us all to shift to is really focusing on student strengths and how we can take the strengths that individual students bring, which are very individualized, their strengths and their life experiences, and all the pieces of their backgrounds, and really leverage those as entry points to build up their areas of growth. All of our learners have areas of growth. And, another thing I think about all the time that should just apply to all learners is when we think about the idea of scaffolding, the whole purpose of scaffolding, you two are the experts of this, but it's, when I think about it in a very general sense, but it's removing barriers to learning, but not removing the learning opportunity and not diminishing the cognitive domain of the learning opportunity, but rather making that opportunity fully accessible for each learner. And to me, that applies to all learners, whether they are labeled as a student receiving special education services or not.
Oh, I love that. I love the asset based. And I love, Sarah, that I have a school that's actually, they're not allowed to use kids' names anymore. Labels, they have to use kids' names, and they have to start with a strength before they talk about a deficit. So if they're,
I love that.
Yeah, it's such a simple change, but I think it's a big change. And I think that's what your work is. And so I'm going to ask you about two different pieces of work because, I've always adored everything you've written and followed your work and your thinking, because I just really think it's from a math mindset of access and equity. And there's, should really think about that if they read your work. And so one of the things that I know you have the Math Pact that I would love to hear about that because I know it's so asset-based, but I'm also going to go retro a little bit on the 13 rules that never expire or that do expire that I find it's one of my favorites. It's a 2014 publication. I know it's free downloadable. I know that, it's got lots of things, but I'm always curious, like when you're out in schools and imagine I'm a new special ed teacher and you come and watch me, I'm sure you don't take your checklist of 13 things and check them off. But I'm wondering what are like the most common mistakes as a field we tend to make that maybe we should be thinking about and how maybe the Math Pact could help us move to that next level.
Yeah. When I think, 10,000 foot view on this, we have from our own past mistakes, Karen and Barb and I, and as well as working with, hundreds of teachers across so many different states and districts and schools and at the state level, we know, a near infinite number of rules that expire that people have now shared with us. But there are a few that are very universal and really span the grade bands that I would maybe use as a good launching point. And the two that come to mind is the idea of the equal sign is one big one. Because so often students think that when you have something as simple as, 2 + 3 equals, they tend to think that equal sign represents the, here comes the answer instead of the idea of equality. And we really need to, that's why it's so important to have different structures of our equations, even in like the first grade when students are first introduced to the equal sign and the notion of that, because we want to build flexibility in that thinking. And because the problem is as soon as we get to 2 + 3 equals some mystery number, a variable, plus, 1, they don't know what to do with that, and all of their thinking falls apart. So one of the rules that expire is really the idea that people might say 2 + 2 makes 4. Don't do that. That's a no-no. You just need to use equal, and from the start, focus on what the meaning of the equal sign is. Think about the equal sign as a balance. Build that up conceptually. So that's one. And then another one I would really love to bring up is not using the ineffective keyword strategy. And we actually have another article that was published specifically on that. I think it was in either the May 2019 or 2020 issue of Teaching Children Math. But we talk about what to do instead. So what I mean by that is we don't want to teach students things like all together means add if you see a word problem. Or sum always means add. Or left always means subtract, because left could mean the left, someone left their backpack behind or something else. And so instead in our article, we provide lots of suggestions, but we don't want to teach this rigid notion of like circling keywords for operations and instead of building meaning of the context. We instead want students to build meaning of the context. And really the way this relates to the Math Pact is not teaching rules that expire is one component of a Math Pact. So the Math Pact is really our extension of the past decade or so of work we've done with this, where we've really said, okay, so people, we're on the same page. Communities are not teaching rules that expire, but now they need to know what to do instead. And our Math Pact talks about effective alternatives, which are based on deep understanding, such as using multiple representations, which aligns so well to UDL, and, having students develop generalizations and patterns for their thinking in math. And so really our Math Pact series really is that how-to guide and framework of how to build up coherent instruction within and across grades within a school and a district.
Sarah, as you were responding, I was really thinking about those, all of the layers to how we develop ideas about math. And I feel like, that stage where a child reaches barriers and now it starts to influence how he feels or she feels about math. So do you have ideas or for our audience about, how do we avoid building in those negative associations with math for these learners?
I love that question. I think the literature tells us a lot on this too, but if I just had to get really practical, I think some of the things I would say would be, first of all, every teacher should make a commitment to themselves that they will never say in front of students, I wasn't a math person or I'm not a math person. Because we know all children look up to their teachers. And so day one, that has to be the commitment. Everyone is a math person and everyone can do math. And so I think that's one big one. Another one is we need to provide, math needs to be open-ended. And I think when we make it very close-ended and rigid and inflexible, that's when students start not seeing themselves in it. And so we need to kind of notice and seek out and showcase students' different ways of approaching problems. And of course, obviously, when we're doing that, we're also formatively assessing, which can give us as educators more knowledge about their understanding so we can target better. And then the other, thing that I'm thinking of is we need to make it contextual. And that really relates to a lot of my transdisciplinary STEM work, which is really focused on, we want students to see math in everything they do. And so instead of giving them plain problems, we want to give them very contextual scenarios and tasks and meaning. So they build all this meaning and they are excited to do math and interested and engaged.
So, my final question for you is, I know you've trained some of the best and prepared some of the best teacher leaders in Central Florida and really had the chance to take them to that next level, getting their doctorates and working in partnership with the district. I'm curious, when you walk into some of those classrooms, because I know some of those teachers, what would be the two things that you're like, yep, that's the best inclusive math class I've seen? What would be the two things that kind of stand out in your mind over and over again that you've seen in those really good classrooms?
Wow, that is an amazing question. I don't know. I mean, sometimes it when you see it, but part of me thinks that I think the teacher feeling empowered and confident is a big part of it, right? And our teacher leaders are unbelievable. And I absolutely feel that when I go in there, when I see their teaching. But when they're empowered and confident as educators, that comes through. But then I think that has to be paired with this nurturing and caring atmosphere, right? Because students not just need to feel safe, but in their environment, but they also, need to feel cared about and that what they say and do matters and that their teacher is going to do everything to help them succeed, not do it for them, but give them the tools and opportunities to succeed. And those high expectations are part of that. So those are just a few things. I could probably think of others if I thought about it more, but I love that question.
No, I think it's exactly, and I think you just circled back to where we started, that it's all about putting those high leverage practices together and empowering teachers in a caring environment. And I thought that was a beautiful answer. Thank you.
And Sarah, I particularly like the, you know, the broad lens with which you can look at this, so that it in particular, that idea of a benchmark approach, really, so that students can build upon their skills without feeling like they are somewhat lesser than if their starting place is different from their peers. I really love that.
We thank you for joining us. As always, you had some wonderful insights and some really beautiful nuggets for the field. So thank you again, Sarah. And if you have questions for us, please send us a tweet at Access Practical or post a question on our Facebook at Practical Access. Thanks.